My name is Genevieve Lane. I was 27 when everything changed, though at the time I told myself it was just an ordinary Tuesday. The house was quiet in the way houses get quiet when something has already ended and nobody has said so out loud yet. I remember the light first. That flat, late afternoon light that comes through the kitchen blinds in stripes and lands across the counter, like something waiting to be noticed. I was slicing an orange when I saw the envelope propped against the fruit bowl. My name, in Marcus's handwriting. Not Jen, the way he'd written it for 6 years. Genevieve. Formal. A closed door disguised as a greeting. Inside was a single flash drive and a folded note. You should watch this before he does. I didn't understand at first. I turned the drive over in my palm, small and gray and utterly unremarkable, the kind of object that shouldn't have been able to hold an earthquake. Then I understood completely, and the understanding arrived not as panic but as a strange, heavy stillness, the way a held breath sits in the chest before it's let go. He knew. He had always known, maybe, or had known for exactly as long as it takes a marriage to curdle without anyone saying the word curdle. I want to be honest because this story only means something if I am. 6 months earlier, I had let myself fall into something I shouldn't have. His name doesn't matter here, not because I'm protecting him, but because he was never really the point. He was a symptom of my own hunger for a version of myself that felt seen, felt urgent, felt like she mattered outside the long, quiet architecture of a marriage that had stopped asking questions of me. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself a great many things. I sat at the kitchen table with the flash drive in front of me for 11 minutes. I counted because counting was the only thing keeping my hands from shaking. Then I plugged it in. It was our wedding video. Not the professional cut with the string quartet and the sunset. The raw footage, my father's trembling toast, my mother crying into a napkin, Marcus at the altar, watching me walk toward him like I was the only solved equation in a life full of unknowns. At the very end, spliced in with a precision that must have taken him days, was something else. A screenshot. A message. My handwriting, my words, sent to a man who was not my husband, on a night I remembered as ordinary. He hadn't sent it to me by accident. He had sent it to me first, a mirror before the exposure. A warning, or a mercy, or both. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there in the stripes of orange light, understanding that somewhere else in the city, my husband was deciding whether to press send on the same video to someone who would never look at me the same way again. I met Marcus in a stairwell, which always struck people as an unglamorous place to fall in love, but I think unglamorous places tell the truth better than restaurants do. I was 23, carrying a box of files down 4 flights because the elevator was broken, and he was coming up 2 at a time with his tie loosened like he'd already lost an argument with his day. We collided on the landing between floors 2 and 3. He caught the box before it hit the ground and said, "I think you dropped your entire life." I laughed before I meant to. That's the memory I kept returning to, sitting in the kitchen with the drive still in the laptop. The video paused on a frame of his face at the altar, young, unguarded, certain of something I no longer trusted myself to name. Marriage doesn't fail in a single moment. It fails in 1,000 postponed conversations. I know that now. I didn't know it in the years when I was too tired to say I feel invisible and instead said I'm fine, just tired. I didn't know it the night I first let someone else's attention feel like proof that I still existed as a person and not just a function. Wife, employee, daughter, the reliable one. I found a box of old letters in the hall closet 3 days after the envelope. Marcus had kept every card I'd ever given him, going back to that first year, tied with a rubber band gone brittle with age. I sat on the closet floor and read them one at a time. My own handwriting from a woman I barely recognized, a woman who used to write, "I chose this. I choose you. I will keep choosing you," like a vow she actually understood the weight of. Somewhere in the reading, I stopped being angry at him for the video and started being afraid of what I'd find if I kept being honest with myself. That's the part nobody prepares you for, that the person who hurts you can also be the one holding up the mirror you've been avoiding for a year. I put the letters back exactly as I found them. Some things you're not ready to untie. That night I texted him one line. I saw it. Can we talk before you send it further? I watched the message sit there, delivered but not read, for 4 hours. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one, and I thought about how light arrives gradually even when you're only waiting for one thing to happen. He hadn't sent it further. Not yet. When I finally saw him, 3 days later, in the doorway of the apartment he'd been staying in since he moved out, a friend's place with mismatched furniture and a coffee maker still in its box, he looked like someone who had rehearsed rage and arrived instead at exhaustion. I wanted to hate you cleanly, he said, before I'd even stepped inside. It would have been easier. I didn't defend myself. I had promised myself in the car that I wouldn't, that whatever came out of my mouth in that doorway would be true even if it cost me the last of his good opinion. I don't have an excuse, I said. I have reasons and none of them make it okay. I just don't want to lie to you anymore. I've been doing that longer than I've been doing the other thing. He let me in. We sat on opposite ends of a couch that wasn't his, and for a long time neither of us said anything. I noticed, absurdly, that he still drank his coffee from the mug I'd bought him for his 30th birthday, a small blue thing with a chip on the handle. He'd brought it with him when he left. That detail undid me more than anything he could have said. I found the drive 3 weeks ago, he told me eventually. On your old laptop, backed up somewhere you forgot about. I sat with it. I didn't send it anywhere for 3 weeks. I just sat with what I knew, trying to decide who I wanted to be on the other side of knowing it. And who did you decide to be? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something pass across his face that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite condemnation. Something more like grief for a version of us that had quietly died months before either of us admitted it. I don't know yet, he said. I sent you the drive because I wanted you to understand what I was carrying before I decided what to do with it. Not to threaten you. I'm not, he stopped, pressed his palms against his eyes. I'm not a man who destroys people, even people who've earned it. I just needed you to see yourself the way I'd seen you. Once. I left that apartment without resolution, but not without something else, a strange, unfamiliar relief. The truth was finally standing in the room with us instead of hiding in a drawer. There's a particular kind of silence that follows confession, not peace exactly, but the absence of the noise that dishonesty makes. I spent the following weeks in that silence, and I filled it the only way I knew how. I wrote. Not to him. Not yet. To myself, in a notebook I bought at a drugstore because it felt important that it not be beautiful. I didn't want to romanticize what I was doing. I wrote about the version of me that had wanted, so badly, to be chosen freshly by someone who didn't already have 6 years of my worst mornings memorized. I wrote about how that wanting had felt like oxygen and had turned out to be smoke. I wrote a letter to Marcus I never sent. In it I told him about the stairwell, about the box of files, about how I used to fall asleep counting the specific rhythm of his breathing because it made the world feel finished, complete, unbreakable. I told him I had let something break anyway, slowly, in the small failures of attention that nobody notices until the damage is architectural. I also, finally, wrote a letter to the man who was not my husband. It was short. It said that I was sorry, not for wanting to be seen, but for choosing the cheapest available way to feel it. I never sent that one either. Some letters exist only to be honest in private, a kind of confession that doesn't need an audience to be real. My sister called during this time, worried, the way sisters get worried when your voice sounds like it's coming from underwater. Do you want him back? She asked, bluntly, the way only she could. I sat with the question longer than she expected me to. I want to be someone worth wanting back, I finally said. Whatever happens after that is his to decide, not mine to force. She was quiet for a moment. That's the first sane thing you've said in a year, Jen. I laughed, and it surprised me. A real laugh. Not the brittle kind I'd been performing at family dinners to keep everyone from asking questions. Something in me was beginning, slowly, to come back online. Not hope, exactly. Just the willingness to keep being honest even when it costs something. 3 weeks after the doorway conversation, Marcus asked to see me again. This time he chose the location, a bench outside the community garden where we used to walk on Sunday mornings back when Sundays still felt like ours. He brought his laptop. My stomach dropped when I saw it, certain he'd changed his mind, that this was the moment the video would go somewhere I couldn't undo. Instead, he opened the file, clicked into the settings and deleted it. Not moved to trash.
Permanently.
I watched the progress bar fill and empty in under 4 seconds, and something in my chest that had been clenched since the envelope finally loosened. "I'm not doing this for you," he said, before I could speak. "I'm doing it because I don't want to be a man who uses someone's worst moment as a weapon, even against someone who hurt me. That's not justice. That's just cruelty, wearing a nicer coat." "Then why did you send it to me at all?" I asked. "Why not just leave and let me wonder?" He considered this for a long time, watching a woman 2 rows over kneeling in the dirt with a trowel. "Because I wanted you to see what I saw," he said finally. "Not to punish you. To wake you up. I think some part of me still believed you could be woken."
We didn't reconcile that day.
I want to be honest about that too, because the tidy version of the story, the one where the wounded husband forgives everything and the marriage is rebuilt more beautiful than before, is a story for people who've never actually stood in the wreckage of their own choices. What we did instead was agree to talk. Just talk. No promises, no performance of healing for anyone watching. Just 2 people deciding, separately, whether they wanted to try to become people worth trusting again. "I'm in therapy now," I told him. "Not to convince you of anything. Because I finally asked myself why I needed someone else's attention to feel like I existed, and I didn't like the answer, and I want a different one." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "That's not for me either. That's the right reason." Word gets out, eventually, in every family, no matter how carefully you try to contain it. My mother found out first. Marcus hadn't told her, and I hadn't either, but grief has its own gravity and pulls confessions out of the people orbiting it. She called me on a Thursday, her voice tight with a disappointment that hurt more than anger would have. "I raised you to be someone who kept her word," she said. "I know," I told her. There was nothing else true to say. I braced for the family fallout the way you brace for weather. The aunt who would bring it up at every holiday afterward, the cousin who would look at me differently, the slow recalibration of how a family sees a person once they've seen the crack in her.
Some of that happened.
Some people needed distance, and I let them have it without arguing for my own forgiveness. I had learned, finally, that forgiveness forced is just another kind of dishonesty. But something else happened too, something I hadn't expected. My father, who rarely said much of anything at all, sat with me on the porch one evening and told me about a mistake he'd made decades earlier, one he'd never told my mother the full truth about, one he'd carried alone because he'd been too afraid of what honesty would cost him. "The difference between you and me," he said, "is that you told the truth even when it was going to cost you everything. I never did. I just got quieter and quieter until your mother stopped noticing there was anything left to ask about. Don't mistake silence for peace. General, it isn't peace. It's just a slower kind of leaving." I thought about Marcus and the envelope, about how he could have destroyed me quietly and easily, and instead chose to show me the truth first, chose confrontation over the comfortable cruelty of secrecy. I understood, sitting there with my father in the fading light, that the video had never really been a weapon. It had been an invitation, the hardest, most honest invitation anyone had ever given me. Look at what you're doing. Decide who you want to be before it's too late to decide anything. 6 months after the envelope, I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. Not because Marcus asked me to, but because I needed to know who I was when no one else's schedule was shaping mine. I painted the walls a pale, uncertain green because it reminded me of new leaves, of something that hadn't decided yet what it would become. Marcus and I saw each other twice a month, sometimes for coffee, once for a long walk along the river where neither of us said much of anything, and it was, for the first time in over a year, comfortable rather than strained. We weren't rebuilding the marriage. We were something else. 2 people who had once built a life together, sifting carefully through the wreckage to see what, if anything, was still worth keeping. I kept the notebook. I filled 3 more of them. In one entry, months in, I wrote something I hadn't expected to be able to write honestly. I don't miss who I was with him. I miss who I could have been, if I hadn't been so afraid of being ordinary that I mistook chaos for aliveness. I ran into the man who was not my husband once, by accident, at a grocery store. We exchanged 3 sentences, polite and hollow, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical sadness, for the version of me that had needed him to feel real. He was not a villain in this story. He was just a door I had walked through because the house I was in had started to feel like it was closing in, and I hadn't yet learned that the answer to a closing house is to open a window, not to leave through someone else's. My therapist asked me once what I thought justice looked like, in the end, for what I'd done. I told her I used to think justice meant being punished enough to earn forgiveness. Now I think justice looks like becoming, slowly and without an audience, someone who wouldn't do it again. Not because I fear consequence, but because I finally understand what I actually wanted, and it was never him. It was to matter. And I had been looking for that in exactly the wrong direction. A year after the envelope, Marcus asked me to meet him at the community garden bench again. It was autumn this time, the light gone amber and low, and the woman with the trowel was gone, replaced by frost-touched chrysanthemums nobody had gotten around to pulling yet. He didn't propose reconciliation, and I hadn't expected him to. Instead, he handed me a small box. Inside was the flash drive, not the one with the video, he told me, but a new one. He'd recorded something himself, a short message, just for me. No one else ever intended to see it. I watched it that night, alone, in the pale green apartment. It was just his face, tired and honest, saying that he didn't know what we would become to each other, friends or strangers or something without a name yet, but that he no longer carried the video, the anger, or the need to see me punished. That he had let it go, actually let it go, not buried it to fester later, because carrying it had started to cost him more than it cost me. I sent you our wedding video because I wanted you to remember the woman who meant every word she said at that altar, he said near the end. I think she's still in there. I hope you find her again. I hope whatever happens next, you get to actually be her. I sat with that for a long time after the screen went dark, in an apartment with walls the color of new growth, in a life that no longer looked like the one I had almost destroyed, but had not yet decided what it would look like instead. I didn't get everything back. I don't think that's how truth works. It doesn't restore what was. It clears space for what comes next. But I got something quieter and, in its way, more valuable. The woman from the letters, the one who used to write "I choose this and mean it completely." I found her again, not in a marriage rebuilt, but in a life rebuilt honestly, stone by stone, with nothing left hidden in a drawer. The light outside my new window came in stripes some afternoons, the same as it had that day in the old kitchen. I stopped flinching from it. I let it land on me instead, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel the need to look away from anything it revealed.